A lot of us are still carrying the shock and heaviness after what happened at Bondi last night. It's a lot to process. And I've gone back and forward about whether to speak about this from a spiritual lens because I know this won't land for everyone. And especially at the moment when there's a lot of rawness in that early grief phase. But for me, if our spirituality doesn't mean anything when life gets this real and this brutal, then what's the point of it? So I decided I'm going to share a perspective that helps me make sense of times like this. And, I invite you to take what supports you and leave what doesn't. But before we get into anything spiritual, I want to be really crystal clear. Violence is never okay. Hurting people, targeting groups, using terror to make a point, that's just a hard no. And I can't think of anything spiritual that could justify that. No religion, no spiritual, no concept can sell me on the fact that they can justify violence. Nothing. And the thing is too, at the same time, I know that there's many of us who hold that spiritual view that can feel really confronting in moments like this because we see ourselves as souls or spiritual beings, however you want to classify it, having that human experience. And some of us believe that everything happens for a reason and that on some level life is happening for us rather than to us. And don't get me wrong here, right? That doesn't mean we like what's happening to us. It doesn't mean that what happened was good. It means that once something has happened, there is the possibility for growth, for truth, and for change that wasn't visible before. And you know what? It brings us a choice. And that's an important choice because it's a choice about who we become in response to the tragic event. And I suppose if I put it to you this way, if we truly live by the idea that we're all one, then logically what we do to someone else, we're also doing to ourselves. We're doing it to the collective because there is no over there. There is only us. And when you start to see it that way, unity isn't soft. It's actually a radical form of accountability. Yeah, because if you are me and I am you, then harming you makes no sense, whether it's spiritually or logically. So I suppose what I wanted to talk about today is why is the concept of embracing unity with all of its diversity so hard to live by in life, especially when we're hurt or scared. So let's look at all the layers and start with our nervous systems. Because our nervous system, like it hates the unknown. Anything different feels unpredictable and unpredictable, not having that sense of control can feel dangerous, can feel unsafe. And I think too, what happens in this space is if we don't have a strong sense of who we are, and we don't have, pardon me, the tools to work with our fears, then it becomes so much easier to turn that discomfort outwards to others rather than sit in our own anxiety. And one of the other layers that we can look at is jealousy and shame. You know, if someone else has something that we don't, whether that's safety, money, love, stability, visibility, even just like the freedom to be themselves, we can secretly feel that we're not enough. And in that space, when you're not feeling worthy, you're not feeling enough, it's very easy to attack or dismiss that person than to face our own pain. You know, we can get thoughts in our mind that, you know, they think they're better than us, or, you know, things like that, which is kind of more about us feeling small and not knowing what to do with that feeling when it comes up. Another layer is that identity and belonging, you know. A lot of us, I suppose, identify and know ourselves through an us versus them lens, whether it's my group, my religion, my country, my culture, my gender, my political team, my race, my sexual preference, even, you know, all these are labels that we use that encourage separation. And if that's all we have, you know, those labels that we cling to, then difference feels dangerous because it threatens our whole sense of self. And that brings in a shortcut to separation, you know? As we start thinking, well, we're good, they're bad, end story. We don't question ourselves. We don't question what we've been taught. We just work in that space of protecting our label, you know, whatever that label may be. And when we start to stack those things together, you know, the overloaded nervous system, the low self-worth, the unprocessed grief and rage, and you know, an identity that's built on separation, we create this perfect condition for dehumanizing others. And that's where violence grows. You know, we don't go from you know, we're spiritual beings having human experience straight to hurting people. We get there through years of disconnection, of fear, of those stories that, as I said before, you know, they don't get challenged. And this is where self-love and self-discovery, you know, it stops being fluffy and it becomes radical change. Because when we truly know ourselves, we can hold those feelings like, you know, I'm scared or I don't understand. And we can hold those feelings without needing to blame anyone or anything outside of ourselves. You know, we can feel jealousy and ask, what is this showing me about my own unmet needs instead of tearing someone else down? And we can feel different from someone and still recognize that they are a soul in a body doing their very messy best, even if you completely disagree with them. And I think too, you know, we can easily go to this space of self-love that is more from an ego perspective, you know, like walking around in that space of I'm amazing, so just screw everyone else. But when we take it back to that place of I'm worthy even with my wounds, and so are you, it puts a whole different perspective on who we are. You know, when we stop abandoning ourselves, we don't need to abandon someone else's humanity to feel powerful. We can have very firm deal breakers around behavior and still absolutely refuse to erase a person's worth at a soul level, you know. And I think this is the edge that, we're walking on. It's not we're all one, so it's all fine, but it's we're all one, which is exactly why violence is such a deep violation, you know? If we're, as I said before, if you're all one and you harm someone, you're also harming me, but you're harming yourself because ultimately you're tearing at the fabric that we live in, right? Under this label of humans. So the big question comes in, where does accountability sit in this? At a soul level, we can hold that energy of we are one human energy source, we're one human family. At a human level, our choices still have consequences, like both statements are true. We can still see someone as a soul in a body and still say what you did is absolutely not okay. It crosses every boundary. It's a deal breaker for me, for the collective. And there have to be consequences. People need to feel protected. But here's the thing. Who is responsible for delivering those consequences? On a human level, I feel that that's a shared responsibility. We have systems that we've elected and put in place, which laws and courts and governments and community organizations whose job it is to protect people and uphold these boundaries in a very real and practical way. And we also have communities, workplaces, schools, faith groups, online forums and spaces that decide what they will and won't tolerate, what gets called out, and also what quiet, gets encouraged on the quiet. But the most important thing, I think, is there is each of us in our own lives, refusing to normalize harm in our homes, our friendships, and in our feeds, right? Because accountability is not about revenge or vigilante justice. It's about saying in this shared reality, there are behaviors that are simply not acceptable. And there are real world consequences when those lines are crossed. Because unity does not mean having no boundaries. Unity means that we recognize there is no way to harm another without damaging the whole. So we take boundaries seriously. And when we say everything happens for a reason or this is happening for us, we're not saying anyone should be grateful for tragedy, and we're not saying this needed to happen, but we're saying we will be changed by this event, whether we like it or not. We will be changed by it. So the question becomes how? Do we harden into more separation, more hate, more of us versus them? Or do we let this be like an unwanted mirror that shows us where our own fears are, our own prejudices are, our disconnection lives? And then we have a choice. Are we going to do something different with this? And maybe in moments like this, it's not about justifying what happened. It's about revealing what has been hiding under the surface. Where have we been outsourcing responsibility to them, right? the government, the courts, the media, without looking at the energy that we personally, without the energy we personally bring into the world in our own space. Yeah. Like, where have we quietly agreed to dehumanize language? Where do we use stereotypes or labels? Or where do we walk around and shrug off warning signs because it was uncomfortable to speak about? And if we really believe that we're all one, then the invitation is not just to demand change out there, but to become more honest and courageous in here, in our own bodies, in our own homes, our own communities. Because you know what? That's where our sphere of power actually lives. And this is the work we can do together. It's getting clear on who we are so we can show up in a way that feels true to ourselves, even when the world feels like it's falling apart. And if you want some support with that in your own life, I'll chuck some self-discovery tools and sessions in the link below. But in the meantime, please, let's look after our nervous systems. Turn off the news if you need to. Breathe, cry, meditate, pray, reach out to the people that you trust. Do whatever helps you remember that our hearts matter. And how we hold our humanity in moments like this is part of the reason that we're here. And whatever you're going through in this space, please know that I am sending you lots of love from my heart center to yours.